Hello and welcome to our weekly Integral Love Relationship webjam. My name is Martin Utschig and I'm the author of Integral Relationships, a Manual for Men, and my new book, Sex, Purpose, Love, Couples in Integral Relationships, Creating a Better World. And the purpose of our weekly webjams is to further the integral love relationship vision. And today I'm super curious about our exploration with Dr. Tom Habib, who developed a couples line of development model that Tom will share with us today. Welcome, Tom.
Good morning or good evening, Martin. Good to be with you.
Depending on where you are in the world, Tom is in Southern California, and I'm in Istanbul, Turkey today, actually. So if you join us live, we invite you to participate by typing your name and where you join us from, and your questions and comments at the bottom right of your screen. And if you are single and looking for a partner, you may also share your integralsingles.com screen name or your Facebook profile name. And we also encourage you to join our conversation live if you feel so inclined, even though we have a full program. But if you want to come on live with a question or a comment, you can click the hand symbol at the top right of your screen. And once I accept your request, a small plugin will be downloaded and a test of your camera and microphone will run before you come online. And this works best or probably only in Google Chrome. Please know that this webjam is recorded and you give us your permission to be included in the replay if you come on live. So I'm going to introduce Tom. Tom is a clinical psychology, obviously with a PhD in San Juan Capistrano, California, where most people speak Spanish, I guess. And he specializes in couples therapy. He's also an organizer for San Diego Integral, where I had the pleasure to participate once a few weeks ago in your beautiful home. And they experiment with creating a container from which collective moments can be sustained. And they call that focused integral group discussions. That's something that Tom and peers there developed. Was very interesting. So if you're in the neighborhood, I'm sure they would be delighted if you joined them in some of their meetings. Tom has published papers on a couples line of development in Integral Relationship Review in the August-November 2016 issue, and on the role of regression and lower right support structures in the December 2014 issue of the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice. So, widely published that work already, but you just shared that you updated the model, and so we really hear some new things today if you happen to be already somewhat familiar with it. And Tom has also presented at the Integral Theory Conference in 2015 and at the Integral European Conference in 2016, where he was recognized for the best practitioner paper and got an honorable mention. And he recently, just a few weeks ago, returned from the Integral European Conference in Hungary, where he presented on our topic today. And finally, in December 2017, Tom was recognized as a top 5% researcher by Academia EDU. So without any further ado.
Thank you, Martin.
We're going to start. I'm so excited to see you again and to learn about this. Obviously, I wrote 2 books on integral relationships, but I never even thought about a couples line of development. So how did you come up with that?
You know, from years of working with couples and reading Wilbur, and like most people, all of a sudden his quadrants begin to make sense when I'm taking on the fantasies in the lower left in couples. And in the presentation, I'll show you some of that. And then in the structuring, in the paper you mentioned, structuring the regression in relationships, I was doing all that work. And in essence, as we've heard this story many times, I was responding to what was emerging in front of me. But I never had a container that really organized it. I remember looking at different theories going, how am I going to fit this into the larger body of the literature? And then, like most people, you read Wilbur and that light goes off. And I mean, you just can't run fast enough to keep filling in all the squares and the lines of development. And that's what it's been for the last 11 years.
Okay. And you are also in a relationship yourself, right?
I am. I'm married to another psychologist for 32 years.
Oh, wow.
And part of what we say is like, we're going to be talking about first love today. And I really believe that's the highest stage we're capable of. And Christine and I cannot keep that as our center of gravity. We can float up into it often. And some of the ways that I talk about in other presentations, but we can't even sustain first love. So what we're going to talk about today is spiritual love. And as the write-up said, I'm hoping you and I can speculate right into it and maybe even horizontally expand some of the concepts, because this is very, very new in many ways.
Yeah.
I'm focusing upon this right now.
Well, I feel very honored that you shared it with me and with us, and that you're open, for feedback, not only from me, but also from the live audience.
Oh, please.
Okay.
Should we start?
Yeah. Do you want to start a slide presentation, or I can start it? Then, so Tom was kind enough to prepare a presentation for us.
So I wanted to start here. If I could rewrite marital vows, this is what I would write. Will you take the temper tantrums, the sensitivity, the overreactions, the insecurities, the character defects, the control issues, the unrealistic expectation, the unresolved family issues, and the uncontrolled regressions, for better or worse?
And everybody would run for the door, right?
Right. So you can see the quadrants, and those are just some of them. The only thing they got right is for better or for worse.
Yeah.
But the complexity of everything emerging in the couple relationship is what makes it such a challenge. Next month, I'm going to be teaching couples therapy to a group of psychologists in San Diego. And many of them say they don't want to do couples therapy because it is so unwieldy and the intensity and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's because everything's arising at once, as we can see on this slide. So the integral folks get this. I have to do a watered down version to people not familiar with it in the psychological community. But if I told people the quality of the relationship is dependent upon each person's individual developmental history, the cultural expectations that they've really absorbed and that kind of run, both their unconscious and conscious fantasies, their ability to modulate the physiological response, especially during conflict, or as when we talk about spiritual skills and the spiritual stage, that overexposure, can you regulate down and center yourself so you don't feel too exposed? And then the lower right in the paper you mentioned, what is the strength of the problem-solving patterns, the rules, the give and take, the boundaries, all of that, really weighs in on the ability of the couple to have a stable relationship. So if we move on, so here is, you can see on the base here, there's the 4 issues from the 4 quadrants I have already mentioned. And then you can see the couples line is really tapping every one of those quadrants, and it's emerging out of it.
It's moving up in all 4 quadrants.
Yep. And it's 3-dimensional. Initially, I thought it was going to be really heavy in the lower left. But as I've really thought this through, I'm realizing it's all 4 quadrants, that type of complexity that early on before my experience with integral, I was having a hard time theoretically conceptualizing. But it's what makes it so challenging for couples and for the clinicians dealing with couples. So here's the couples line, and we're going to run through the first 4 stages relatively quickly.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, please.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
So when you have clients and work with couples, I mean, usually it's a very left-hand approach, right? You work with the individual developmental history and cultural expectation. How, as a therapist, do you cover all four quadrants? If you maybe can say a little bit about that, or do you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm aware of all four quadrant. So let's say if a couple gets into discussions around money or sex, the really volatile type issues,
Yes.
Immediately I'm looking at the upper right and I'm bringing people down. Like there's a couple I was with this week. Over the last couple months, I've been doing a little bit more individual with her just to get her centered and allow her husband to do what he does without her reacting from the physiological end. Because everything else was unachievable without her calming that down. A lot of people are probably aware of the researcher Gottman.
Yes.
Gottman and Gottman, Julie and John. He said that when a couple's fighting, their body looks like they're in a war zone. And it's certainly what I see is that I will not allow a couple to dissolve into that type of fighting. So yes, I'm looking at all these quadrants, and it depends what content we're in. Like that lower left, cultural expectations, I'm looking at the fantasies. Warren Farrell cites a study where there are 25,000 women in this country that read 20 or more romance novels a month.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that is woman's pornography.
Exactly, yes.
It's an objectification of what men are capable of. And to some degree, it's not living in relationship to the ideal in a healthy way. Because there's a different, the ideal can't contaminate contentment, I often say.
Yeah.
I'm looking at every one of these quadrants and I'm trying to manage the content so that they can have successful interchanges between them as we go.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Can I move on?
Yes, please.
So, today we're going to talk about the spiritual, and we're going to try to do a deep dive into some like current thinking in that. But we're going to move through the safety roles, relational, and first love. Getting from relational to first love, especially for folks in the integral community, is what's actually achievable. And another webcast, like if you go to Jeff Saltzman's Daily Evolver or the Wisdom Factory, I've done presentations on that, an 8-step process, how you actually initiate first love. So I'm not going to do anything on that today. The interested reader can just go back, or listener can go back and find something on that.
Yeah. But can you briefly define what you mean with first love?
Yeah, I will. So let me start at the bottom, safety and attraction.
Okay.
This is a wonderful stage. This is when we fall in love. And it's really, one of the things I like to talk about it is, if you notice, romantic movies often end at this stage. Boy meets girl, they fall in love. It's a wonderful feeling. But it's really based on a powerful attraction, absorption, excitement, chemistry. We don't even know who we're in love with yet. We know very little about them. Yeah. This is the upper right biological kicking in. And with all the lower left fantasies, about love being perfect. And we think we've realized it, but it's not going to last. So when somebody meets someone, I tell them up front, can you tell me 5 things wrong with them yet? And they usually can only come up with maybe 1 early on. But of course, within 5 years, they can come up with 5 pages.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful stage, and it's a very important stage that doesn't totally go away. But what throws us out of safety and attraction is reality. And I didn't mention that the heart of safety and attraction state is a pre-trans fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how Wilber defines it. It's the mistaken interpretation that a behavior, motive, or understanding originates from a higher stage of development.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs when one confuses emotional enthusiasm, fired by bodily sensations, with a much more developed capacities of empathy and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that definition. I mean, I pulled a little bit from the different texts that he wrote on that, but it's really at the heart of, the safety and attraction stage. And I'm going to do a lot more work in the lower left, going after some of those fantasies and writing about that. I just haven't had time yet to get going on that. So it's reality that throws us into the role stage. You find out the person you're with is less than perfect, and you're going to have to build a relationship. Nobody walks into a great relationship. They have to build it, by going through these stages and doing some of the work. Now, if on, say, in spiral, you're already at green or yellow, obviously these stages are going to go a lot faster. But like anything, the person, and you've written about this, Martin, the person with the lowest ceiling sets how high the couple can go. Because by definition, it's a relationship of two.
Yes.
So this in this stage, we got to get down all our roles, the interactional patterns. It's the beginning of the relationship. Most couples get stuck here, and they don't even get to the relational where it's working that well. And in this stage, like the relational stage, there's two persistent fantasies. The first one, I got involved with the wrong person, or I married the wrong person.
Yeah.
The second fantasy that's persistent is other people, like when they watch the movies, read the romance novels, get to live at safety and attraction. And they don't. It doesn't stay for anyone. And I usually tell people, if you don't know this yet, you're not ready to get in a committed relationship. You need to spend more time in relationships.
And obviously, young people, they need to practice that. We're not born with these skills, right? So, and people who are serial daters and always break up from safety attraction to roles, they never build the muscle basically to embody these roles.
Absolutely. Developmental stage, as you said, in young people, as soon as they feel them moving into roles and role stage, they're going to catastrophize it and move out of the relationship. And that's all right. They're young. They need to understand this. But you can see how a person's individual pathology, their health in the upper left, is going to play a factor in here.
Yes.
That, depending upon what went on in their own life, is how well they're going to adjust to the role stage.
Yeah.
So
for me, it was kind of actually thinking back, since my parents were together all their life and had clearly defined gender roles. My mom never had a work outside the house, and then my father was the breadwinner. That's also kind of like the relationship roles that I then automatically assumed and was flabbergasted when they didn't work. Right, when I dated women who were very emancipated and independent, I had to relearn my role in relationship. So,
you're anticipating the next stage when you say that, Martin, because in the next stage, before I go there, in the next stage, the relational stage didn't even come online to 1964 or the mid 60s. And it's exactly what you just said, is those of us that were born earlier or had parents that were really in role stage, it was a huge adjustment for us. And it still is for a lot of people in different parts of the world. And it's difficult. I mean, some of the culture wars and the political fighting is an expression of this adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Heidi Hornelman at the Wisdom Factory,
Yes.
she said to me once, when the violence in the home ceases, there'll be more peace in the world. And I wish I could find the quote of that somewhere, because you can see it. It's the foundation of, if we're not right at home and we're not in a really strong, loving relationship, how we're going to interact in the world and with our families is going to be limited to some extent.
Yes, yes.
So, in addition to the two persistent fantasies, you can see their emergence out of safety and attraction into the role stage here in this cartoon. Mm-hmm. He says, my ideal woman knows the infield fly rule in baseball. Yeah. She goes, my ideal man knows what a credenza is and can lift it. And in the third frame, they look at each other with that emergence into roles, and they're left in the fourth frame with that subtle disappointment. I love this cartoon. This is a transition cartoon of what it's like for people. And then even more, in this duplex cartoon, he says to her, trying to bargain their way to stay into and this is about the lower left fantasies. I'll tell you what, Millie, I'll start acting like the guys in your soaps when you start dressing like the girls in Victoria's Secret commercials.
Yeah.
So you can see it. I mean, being in Orange County, the number of plastic surgeons we have, and the problem we have with, women aren't allowed to age, the pressure on them, and men looking in the wrong direction for where fulfillment and purpose comes from. And I know purpose is big for you, when you're writing. And it is. It gives meaning to what we're doing. So,
which you have in your relationship. I mean, you have the same profession, and to an extent, I'm sure, a shared purpose that is probably a big connecting element or commitment element in your relationship, I would assume.
It is. Sharing the same profession helps. And now Christine is going to the conferences and learning with me. That's even better. The raising children was a huge purpose. I mean, but again, it has to be built. You don't just walk into that.
Yes.
So a little more on the lower left, these are all the fantasies and whatnot. And there's so much more to do there because this is constantly redirecting people and their hopes and dreams. And I already said this, the ideal by definition is a beacon that we're walking and moving towards, but by definition, we're never going to get there. So it must not contaminate contentment. And that's crucial to reach stage 4, is a heavy dose of contentment. But I'm a little bit ahead.
Okay.
So this is what you already anticipated, Martin, was that relational doesn't come to fruition until the mid-60s or so. And one of my papers that you mentioned, lower right quadrant, this is the flexibility in the intimate relationship in terms of being there for each other. It's the structuring work. And this is what I'm doing most of the time in couples therapy, is I'm taking them from the roles and I'm going to relational. And if I can get them in relational, I call it a day and we're done.
Yeah.
Other than more recently, which is going to be a subject today, I'm exposing them to elements of first love and spiritual love by different methods. And I'm calling this a form of pixie dust. And what I'm finding as I wrote up in the description today, it seems to operate kind of like an accelerator for their growth. Because for the moment while I describe it and I help them and perhaps feel the embodiment for a moment, they want more. It's almost like a spiritual experience.
Yeah. It's a state experience that you help them to have.
Exactly. It's a state experience. And so even though, it's really hard, people usually don't stay in therapy to achieve first love. I'm still doing things to promote both first love and spiritual love.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the relational stage, the two persistent fantasies are still here. And this couple's doing well because they know how to give and take. They work together. They can raise children. They're not
Mm-hmm.
regressing. They're not making a mess. But they have that persistent fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I might have married the wrong person. I could have did better.
Mm-hmm.
And other people give to live at safety and attraction.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't.
Yeah.
So that deconstruction of those fantasies that don't help is going to be really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, first love. I've written up and I've talked quite a bit. Actually, at the conference, I touched upon what we're going to talk about today, but we're going to do a much deeper dive today.
Mm-hmm.
But I do, there's plenty you can see on like Saltzman's show and whatnot, that it
Yes.
really has the directives down of how to get to first love.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be working. People are using an external source of energy to mimic what goes on at this stage. And I want to do a little description of it. You asked me earlier on, how did I develop the couples line?
Yes.
This is the observation I made years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I asked myself, how can a couple do 85% of their relationship right, and it's the 15% wrong that becomes the most substantial part of their state experience?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that realization? Because all of a sudden, it started to pull together for me. Wow, lower left messages,
Mm-hmm.
the inability to not knowing where to go.
Mm-hmm.
There's only been the relational stage, and there was no couples line, even though people kind of talked about, a spiritual love or soulmates. There wasn't enough of your work and my work out there to really give them a viable path and a map to follow. So that's what got me going. Were there similar things for you that happened?
So can you go back to that slide real quick, the previous
Sure.
one? All right. So do the couples then overly focus on the 15% of the negative, or what you call what's wrong, so to speak, in the relationship? And is that often has to do with the primary fantasies, right? Of the success object versus sex object, I would assume. And the other part is that mainly the unconscious, like childhood wounds, emotional reactions to the partner's reality. And these problems, then they become so large, the desires, the primary fantasies, and then the conflicts, that they consume the rest of the relationship. That's
absolutely. What I would add to that list would be their upper left skills on making subject object and not catastrophizing these shortcomings they're probably seeing, so that they can see the big picture. But I mean, it is pretty poor, the level of state experiences couples have at this point. I mean, most couples would be ashamed of letting somebody outside see how much they regress and how much they really get into it in the mud.
Yeah.
And we don't call it abnormal because that's what almost everyone does. But you can see the convergence of all of this, our individual growth, the ability, to stay centered, and how it's weighing upon two people coming together and then qualitatively building something that has a lot more legs than the individual endeavor.
Yeah.
Because of the synergy and everything else that both of us have written about.
So in other words, they're not at a stage yet where they can see these apparent conflicts, right, which are just two different perspectives and two different unconscious bodies, so to speak, or emotionally unconsciousness, as an opportunity for healing and growing and awakening.
Right. They're catastrophizing still.
Yeah.
They're overreacting to what there's probably correctness in what they're seeing, but they're amplifying it and they're taking it totally out of context because it's important. It's kind of like protecting children. If there's such a physiological reaction that's built in, that if we don't get on top of that, then we can't use our higher self in order to mediate it and build upon it. Yes. And slowly we're bringing that together in a way that it works.
Okay. Thank you.
So I want to introduce first love this way, because this is seeing the wider picture of, and this is some of the gratitude in how you get into first love. So I use this metaphor that imagine if you were sick and your neighbor came over and they cooked, they did some laundry, they vacuumed, they went to the drugstore and got you medication. They took care of the children. Wouldn't you feel incredibly grateful at that neighbor? I mean, wouldn't you kind of keep that in a context? That's what people that we get involved with intimacy, their overall contribution, assuming the relationship is pretty stable and hasn't gone to absolute chaotic interactions, they're actually dedicating their life to the we-ness. And if you're catastrophizing and seeing the 15% wrong, then you're not open to this. And this is at the heart of first love. And the reason I call it first love is that you're finally in love with the person, not the projection, not the fantasies that safety and attraction. You're finally feeling them and what they do, and you want to partner with them. So say it's late in the evening and Christine's getting ready for bed. She's got things to do. I don't even want to go to bed yet. Christine, what can I do to help you? And it's that heartfelt feeling of being bonded with her and wanting to partner with her, feeling her at that level.
Yes.
And that's how you do it. And again, remember, the other videos really have a lot more description of this. So in this stage, we're finally free from the pull of safety and attraction. And in one of the papers, I call the safety and attraction stage a black hole that keeps trying to suck all of us in through the lower left cultural vortex and everything else. And that isn't the direction that love really resides. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
So just to finish this part so we can get on to the real good stuff, the spiritual stage. I have never seen a couple here. Jeff told me on the podcast he feels like Chuck and him can touch this stage occasionally. And I believe him. But to have it as a center of gravity, I don't think so, for the reasons I'm going to talk about later on. So I really call it rarefied ground for the blessed few. And again, I'm just projecting into what it might look like. But as I've done this, it's getting more and more granular. And I want to move on to this because this is really kind of articulating it a bit.
Yes.
So what I've done here is show the skill level between first love, which is a huge step forward, and then spiritual love, which is even bigger. And I want to start on the second item on the left, on this first love skills. So in first love, there's some ability to look at ourselves while our partner is observing us. Now, you can get a real good feeling of this is, say if you're watching a romantic movie and you're upset. I mean, to this day, I will turn away from Christine and not necessarily look at her, although anyone that's seen the exercises to get to first love, I'm using exactly that energy to groove the path of intimacy. But you can see I can't show up fully transparent. Christine at the conferences, she used to say, I want to go in, the breakout groups where we practice skills.
Mm-hmm.
she'll tell me, I want to do it without you, Tom. And part of it is it's the freedom to operate and to show up in a way that's even more difficult to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that transparency that really is a bit of a litmus test on how centered and focused you are.
Mm-hmm.
So at first love, you are beginning to show up that way rather than turn away. I'm looking at her and I'm grooving a path of embodiment, of the path of that feeling with her that seems to persist. And like I said, the 8 steps I've talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
In spiritual love, transparency is running whenever it needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a clear ability to look at that and to do that and to show up in that way. And the advantage of that is amazing because whereas if we go back to the left side, right underneath the one we just did, even in first love, there's a tendency for overexposure and shame.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you
I
see
was
that?
just thinking about that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to say more on that?
Well, I didn't read that line until you mentioned it, and as you shared about Christine and you, I was thinking about what is called the fear-shame dynamic in relationships, and feeling shame to reveal deep intimacy, and women are experiencing fear of abandonment if they show what's really going on inside of them, and so couples get caught in this fear-shame dynamic, potentially.
I totally agree. Christine has told me before that it's kind of like trusting me at that level with her. Mm-hmm. And remember, in all relationships, they've seen us at our lower selves. And so it becomes necessary to compartmentalize those experiences so that it doesn't contaminate what might be a first love interchange. Mm-hmm. So we have to put that aside and decide at that moment, I'm going to show up at this depth of connection. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be an avenue to discuss problems, which is the most frequent entry point for people to dialogue. It's a rupturing connection that people start a dialogue. I can't think of a worse place to start than when you're already angry and hurt. Yes. But that's what most people do. Mm-hmm. That's what motivates them to process things. Yeah. So in first love, there's still the tendency for overexposure. And unlike spiritual love, in spiritual love, there's quick adjustments to exposure. So what I'm going to do at spiritual love, I'm going to have really well built in that I've accepted that I'm never going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. I'm expecting to discover both shadow and unintegrated things in me. Yes. And rather than setting off an upper right visceral reaction, mm-hmm. if it does overexpose me, and this is a little bit of edge work I'm doing, I might drop into third and fourth person experience and reiterate that this is my goal. I want to be able to, really grow and learn with somebody, and I don't want to overreact. I want to stay transparent. Mm-hmm. And we do that. When us integrals get together, we practice showing up in ways where there's a level of transparency in like most of our relationships. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think of that idea of, quickly adjusting back to third and fourth person experiences? Mm-hmm. I got the metaphor of these telescopes, and they have on these mirrors little actuators that adjust the mirror in a fine-tuned way so that it can account for the distortion in the atmosphere. Yeah. And I think that's what happens in our ability is we're not overwhelmed by things at the spiritual love skill because it's so well built in. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. So a sense I'm having looking at these two lists is that in stage 4, there is still the maintaining the functionality of the relationship and maybe even the loving connection, maybe given a higher priority than, let's call it, radical transparency or intimacy.
Yeah.
So you may say, well, I rather preserve the love and the relationship at the expense of being fully transparent and intimate. While in the stage 5, you have sort of like a trust in that you will be okay, and that the relationship can only advance when you go this full risk of rejection if you become fully transparent, because you have some kind of higher aspiration of fully awakening radical transparency. And also, I feel that this is then driven by really knowing what your purpose is and ultimately living your purpose ultimately over the relationship. And so
Right.
you would not want the relationship to distract you from living your purpose, but to support and further, your purpose through creating synergy. And
Yeah,
you
I had
can
the
only
right.
do that when you're fully transparent and honest, and of course also clear who you want to become in the container of the relationship in order to better live your purpose. Would you
I
kind
love
of
that.
resonate with that?
Oh, totally. I had to write down radical transparency, which I'll quote you on now. I love that. And I love it to tie in with
Mhm.
purpose
Yes.
because it does. We become cosmic tourists at spiritual love. And I'm taking my partner with me, theoretically, and I'm watching the ever unfolding of what's emerging. And because right on the bottom, you can see in spiritual love, there's heavy use of intuition and subtle energies.
Mm-hmm.
And together they can co-emerge uh, into these realizations, something you can't do alone. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like even you and I talking right now, we're both developing more insights, as we do this.
Yes.
When a couple that's attuned together physiologically, emotionally, and everything, you can
Mm-hmm.
see what a generative ground it becomes, provided the relationship circuitry can really funnel that level of current, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that is really good. I like that. Can I move on?
Yes.
So underneath that one is still looking for affirmation and first love skills. And in most stages of development, it is the consensus of how we do things, my perception of life. Can you understand me? And, do you feel me?
Mm-hmm.
And this is transcend and include. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what happens in spiritual love is unitive diversity. And
Mm-hmm.
Larry Keel gave me this term out of a book he did, unitive diversity. So here, the reason we call it unitive diversity is the differences in the couple create an energetic polarities.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're no longer as addicted to the affirmation as they are to the emergence. And so what happens is you got two people creating pixie dust at the same time for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that cross fertilization that we get. That's what I
Yes.
loved about being in Europe with these people is it was almost like our words couldn't carry the emergence quick enough. And,
Yes. Uh-huh.
we get that feeling. That's what keeps us addictive to this area of consciousness
Yeah.
is it becomes a co-creation that we're dedicated to.
A co-emergence.
Emergence.
So that's what I call, you move from interbeing, just being fully present with each other, to interbecoming, and you get addicted almost like to the becoming process in the context of the relationship. Does that make?
Totally. I was just looking for the one that, so down here, where are
And
we?
if I may interrupt you for a second,
Please.
a person named Flo has, please could you define what overexposed does mean in this context?
Yes.
Tendency for overexposed or for exposure shame.
Yep. So for most couples, when their spouse sees something new in them,
Mhm.
and they bring it up and they go, you know, oftentimes you talk about yourself too much when we're with people socially.
Mhm.
They feel a sense of shame because the overexposure, being put under that type of a bright light in that moment,
Mhm.
doesn't help them. It causes them to get defensive and whatnot. Whereas when they've accepted that I'm not perfect and I'm going to be always growing, and they're dedicated to higher order things, then they're going, ooh, do I really do that? Yeah, the other day you raised blah, 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 and it wasn't a good idea. Wow. Well, live and learn. See, I'm not overexposed. I'm paying attention, but I have well ingrained that, I'm not going to overreact to those type things because I want more emergence. It only benefits me.
Mhm.
So could you add anything to it, Martin, to help with the question?
I think that's as good as it gets from me right now.
Okay.
Just for your information, I switched to sharing my screen because now you can see the complete list that you couldn't see in the PowerPoint before because it's covered by our two images and I cannot move them.
Oh.
So now people
Okay.
can see the complete list of spiritual life skills. So I'll leave that up until we're done with that part.
Okay. It's right on time because I want to drop down to the one that says open to new ownership of projection. And underneath it says second tier capabilities. Can you see that one right down
Okay,
there?
it's on the left side, yes.
On the left side, yep.
Yes, under acceptance of wounds by partner.
Yeah, underneath acceptance of wounds by partners. So open to ownership of projection. And this is a second tier capability.
Mm-hmm.
So at this level, you know that there's projection. I'm always telling couples that the distortion rate in intimacy is 99% for most couples. And for the very best couples, it's 50% distortion. This is another one of these points where Christine and I have said to each other, if it's this hard for us, what do other people do to cope with that level? But here,
so what you mean with distortion is that basically what we perceive through our senses gets distorted through our, and we can now talk about the brain, right? How everything goes through the amygdala and through the different parts, gets compared with previous experiences and then interpreted by the mind in a distorted way that's filtered through our own experiences.
absolutely. And a couple skill I teach, when you have that sense, you have to be open. And this is what open sounds like. When you don't call me on the phone, when you're late, it makes me feel like I don't matter. And I also have fears that something happened to you. Is that true? Now, you see how open I am in that sentence rather than going with the upper right, amygdala hijacking and all the physiology. You jerk, I can't believe you don't call me. You're so self-centered, which is the average discourse. So this couple, though, they've gone through enough appreciation and the other person has shown up enough that they know in their heart they do care. They get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
So rather than just react and project, they're open to it. That they're communicating in that way. Now, if we switch over to the spiritual love,
yes,
they're not even bothered to project. It's a dialectic. They're in conversation. As those feelings emerge, it goes right to the dialect. And I want to get a little more granular on this. So the ownership and transparency decreases the need for projection because you get a lot more information that's real-time and accurate, especially the ownership. You know, when they go, geez, I should have called you immediately. You know, I just got so tied up, I forgot. You're not asking for too much. You know what I mean? There's no need to project when somebody has that level of ownership. So as you said earlier, Martin, there's a shared priority between the couple, purpose you said, to find truth, and personal reaction becomes backgrounded. Can you see that? So in the search for truth, they're backgrounding that personal reaction as what was projection at the lower stages emerges. Which is an incredible process. To be able to do that, you know, that quickly is incredible.
Yes.
So in this process, there's a sort of surrendering going on that Larry Kyle likes to talk about. There's a suppression of the egoic defenses for the emergence of truth. So, and it is those defenses, you know, that tendency to feel humiliated that even shows up in transparency, that those egoic defenses are kind of like, I know they're there. I'm committed to this purpose between us. I want to find the truth.
Yeah. But do you consciously use the word there, repression? I mean,
suppression is the word I use.
Oh, suppression. Okay.
Yeah. Do you know the differentiation between repression?
Since English is my second language.
Oh, sorry. So this comes out of the psychoanalytic literature.
Okay.
Repression, you don't know you're doing. You're just stuffing stuff and it's going into the unconscious and manifesting a shadow.
Okay.
Suppression, you're consciously aware of, and you're doing it as a skill. It's a skill. Even though I might have anxiety up front, you know, about meeting somebody new, I'm consciously suppressing that, and I'm showing up with my interpersonal skills.
Yeah. And where is that healthy and where is it unhealthy?
Suppression is always healthy, for the most part, and repression is always unhealthy.
Yeah. So let's say I have an emotional reaction to my partner showing up late, for example. But I realized that it's not really helpful to discuss my feelings because it wasn't a big deal. And there are more important things that serve our love and our purpose and the emergence of our relationship, that I'm suppressing my upset and not share it. Is that what you're suggesting here?
I am. If it isn't a pattern, so that it's going to go into both unconscious and resentment, that if it's just, you know, one of those things, you know, I love that phrase. I wish there was a better word for it. Shit happens. Because it does.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to roll with certain things. Another way I teach that is at times when our spouse regresses and they're very moody or upset, there needs to be an adult in the room, and that's the paper on regression. And so when you walk away and they're really regressed into a lower level, you get to roll your eyes as a survival technique. You don't let them see you roll your eyes, but you get to do it as kind of a managing, you know, your own reaction and not, you know, articulating that, as you said right there.
Interesting.
So
that will probably rub a lot of people the wrong way who are more in the first love skills and are a lot in nonviolent communication, expressing needs, but then you're getting back into individuality in a way, right? And
That's right.
processing a lot instead of the spiritual love skills feels almost like a little bit more pragmatic because the relationship serves a higher purpose, higher than just healing old wounds or constantly trying to create that intimate heart connection, which sometimes can become somewhat a little bit of a dead-end road, right? If that is the only purpose of your relationship, and it doesn't have a higher spiritual purpose.
Right. I mean, the lowest stages have limited connections, and it's a lot more difficult there because so much of it's off the table. But this idea of prioritizing what you're going to deal with when, that is necessary at every stage. Now, at the role stage, they're not doing a very good job of it. They can go from 0 to 60 in the wrong direction in a moment's notice. And that's not a very stable relationship because the patterns, the lower right patterns, are not transmuting the energy that's flowing, and it just overwhelms the relationship. And as I said, there's no shortage of people that do that.
Yeah.
Can I get back up into dialectic?
I just want to say one more. It's kind of like a question. But if there is recurring emotional reactions to your partner's reality, then of course we need to either look, is that a wound that I have to heal because what my partner does is really nothing unusual and nothing abusive. It just triggers an old wound, right? Or the behavior of the partner is really abusive and not acceptable. It's not in service of the relationship or the higher purpose. And then the behavior of the partner, may be required to change. And it's sometimes hard. And it's sometimes hard to see the difference between the two, right? Is it my shit or is it really abusive of behavior of my partner?
Yes. It's not transcend and exclude. It's transcend and include. I even suspect the spiritual love couple will need to drop into a relational level and problem solve at the level you just articulated. They're not always going to have that center of gravity. They're going to have to get at that level at times because they're not going to be at their higher self all the time.
Yes.
So yes, I do think that's necessary. I was only articulating when they're at fifth stage that they end up prioritizing things and they suppress things that aren't serving the higher purpose, as you had said also.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Okay.
So
you wanted to move on?
Yeah. So at this stage where the dialectic replaces projection, so they have a fluid state of co-emergence here. This is the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's really quite incredible. And I'd love to see this couple operate of doing that because the only thing that's going to slow them down is exhaustion to what's going to emerge. But the excitement of that energy that we feel when we're with different people that can even show up at any second tier capacity, we can feel how it becomes self-generating. And then the field between us, becomes an entity in itself. So one of the ways we're articulating this is energy is found via eros without losing self. And this is really important because
that is very important. Yes.
Say again?
That is very important. This difference in unity, which I think you mentioned earlier, not, you're one as a couple, but still individuals in your own expression.
I didn't think of it that way, Martin. I was thinking of another way, But that's absolutely true. You don't lose the individual self. But what I'm saying, for the individual, you don't lose your sense of self while you're riding that wave of eros.
Yeah.
So, because when things go wrong at this level, that's when grandiosity and excessive power sets in. And we've seen that with certain spiritual leaders, especially when they start to, feel other people's gratitude and praise. They're not grounding their eros, and it goes in the wrong direction to grandiosity rather than feeling the humbleness, feeling, what you don't know, keeping it all in context.
Yeah.
So a good way to do that, the healthy enactment of eros, the ascension that we all love,
Yes.
but it follows agape back into the body and into the world.
Yes.
Isn't that nicely said? Larry Kyle helped me with that yesterday.
Yeah. Very good.
And that's how we grounded back in there of knowing, because then it's all the way up and all the way back in. And the truths emerge more so when we're grounded into that, because that's the biggest part of our base. And we avoid a lot of the heresy of people at that higher level.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can go back to our image. Wow, this hour flew by like nothing.
It really
did. This definitely feels like a conversation that needs to be continued, Tom. So I will ask you to come back pretty soon, because it feels like we only scratched the surface and there's so much potential to be explored. This transition from 4 to 5, I find totally fascinating. And it's amazing work what you put out there.
Thank you. It's exciting work to do.
Yes, and very needed and very helpful. So if people feel inspired and they want to connect with you, where can they reach you, Tom?
So my website is drtomhabib.com. No period after doctor. And you can get both academic papers there, videos and things like that. If you just want academic papers, academia.edu, and just put Tom Habib in the search bar.
Yeah. Your last name is, like mine, unique enough that people can find you.
Yeah, I never liked my last name, but the uniqueness does help, as you say.
Yeah. Okay, well, greetings to California. I'm, as I mentioned, on the other side of the world, almost 10 hours ahead of you. And Germany is playing Sweden now, so I'm going to watch soccer and hope the Germans win.
Good luck in that.
Yeah, we need it. Thank you, Tom. Martin. Have a good day, and we'll schedule an encore to this for sure.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, bye-bye.